What is going on, everyone? James Hancock here. I am unfortunately a day late with this review, but I just saw the first two episodes of the new AMC show, The Sun. The reason I'm late is because last night was UFC 210, and I needed to watch two of my favorite fighters, sadly, lose. Chris Weidman in the co-main event and Anthony Rumble Johnson in the main event. And then he went retired on us, a guy who's the scariest person alive, but that is neither here nor there because we're here to talk about The Sun. And the reason I checked it out is because I've heard from a couple of reliable sources that the source material, the novel, which was written by Philip Meyer in 2013, is one of the best Westerns ever written. And the people that recommended it to me basically said, ever since they read Lonesome Dove, which for a lot of people is one of the all-time great Western novels, that they basically have had an itch that is impossible to scratch ever since then because they've been unable to find a story as compelling and interesting as that novel until they came across The Sun. But I'm an idiot and I don't read enough and I watch too much TV and movies, so I have not read the book. But on the basis of these first two episodes, what I'm going to try and do is read the book and finish it before the end of the first season, which is a total of 10 episodes, so that I'll be able to do an appropriate compare and contrast by the end of the season, because I'm definitely in. I like Westerns a lot. I mean, if you look back at the films of like Anthony Mann and Sam Peckinpah and Bud Bedecker and John Ford and Howard Hawks, and I'm just a rabid Western fanatic in film and television less so, but shows like Westworld I'm really into. Obviously, that's more of a sci-fi thing involving Western, but I haven't really followed Westerns in TV that much recently, and this is a great way to kind of get back into that world because we just don't get that many great Western movies anymore. Maybe occasionally we get a cool one, but it's pretty rare. Going back to Lonesome Dove, I remember when I first read that book, I was so addicted to it that I would be driving around, and this is when I still lived in Los Angeles, and I would have the paperback in my lap so that if I got to a stoplight or got stuck in traffic, I could open it up and read a few sentences, which is not necessarily the world's smartest thing to be doing when you're in traffic, but I was doing it nonetheless, and I've read it several times since then. The TV show is very much of its time, but it's got obviously Robert Duvall as Gus and Tommy Lee Jones as Call, and those performances have not aged today, even if the TV show, it shows all the signs of age you would expect from a 30-year-old television show. But let's get around to The Sun. What's great about the Western genre is that it's so malleable because you're basically just dealing with the tapestry of history and jumping off from there. So whether you're doing a show like Deadwood, which is just about life in a town where during a gold rush, I think that was North Dakota, I believe that's where it was set, or you're dealing with a movie like Red River, where it's just a bunch of people after the Civil War trying desperately to take their cattle to market in a place that's not totally poverty-stricken after the Civil War. You can tell any kind of story you want. You can adapt samurai revenge sagas into westerns, as you saw with Sergio Leone taking Yojimbo and turning it into A Fistful of Dollars. I mean, the possibilities are limitless, and depending upon the area you're talking about, you always have a couple of really, really good filmmakers and storytellers and novelists lending their hand to this incredible, rich tapestry. The Sun is an unusual one because The Sun takes place at two different eras at the same time. In the present day, which is 1915, which is kind of almost too late for traditional Western material, although Sam Peckinpah might disagree with this film The Wild Bunch, which very much takes place at roughly the same time. But you have a situation where Pierce Brosnan as Eli McCullough. He's desperately trying to hang on to his land and find ways to stay relevant because he feels like the cattle industry is stagnating and he really wants to get into the oil business and try and attract investment to South Texas. While at the same time he's facing threats from some local outlaws, essentially, who want to reclaim South Texas and give it back to Mexico. And he's got some strife within his family. One of his sons, who's a little bit more clean and moral, really just wants to stick to the cattle business because it's always been reliable and it's always been their go-to. And then there's a slightly less savory son who's more than happy to swindle people and convince them that there's a lot of oil to be had in the area, even though there's no evidence suggesting that's the case. The other story that we see is Eli as a very young man in 1849 when his family is completely slaughtered in a nighttime raid by some local Comanche. I think they're Comanche. And he's the only survivor, and you basically are seeing him try and just learn to survive in the inhospitable West 500 miles from the closest white man. Now, in this era of really, really phenomenal, incredible television, we get very spoiled when you can throw a rock and hit a great show. And I feel like I'm either discovering or having great shows recommended to me all the time. And so it's always a temptation when you're looking at a new one, like how does it compare to Westworld, or how does it compare to Fargo, or how does it compare to any other show that you care to name that's really, really on fire right now. And I would say that The Sun is a notch below that like solid gold, perfect TV where you're just completely, totally blown away by every second and you just can't pull yourself away, where you're going to basically stay up until dawn because you can't bear the idea of not finding out what happens next. Like that is a rare level of television that shows like The Sopranos reach or The Wire. And yeah, The Sun is not there, at least from my own point of view. But it is really damn good. I mean, the acting is incredible. The writing is incredible. It's really savage. It's really violent. It's got a really interesting perspective on history because you have this environment in South Texas depicted in the show where Mexicans, Native Americans, and white folks are all living on top of one another. And between all these three different factions, you've got a lot of shared history, sometimes as allies, sometimes as enemies. But also you have this generational clash where people who are Pierce Brosnan's age tend to think of the natural state of things as being openly warlike and hostile. And that's what they're used to, and that's kind of how they like it. And then you got a younger generation that just wants to feel safe and have good jobs and work hard and protect their families. Let's dig into some of the specifics of the two episodes. The first episode is called First Son of Texas, and it grabbed me. I was debating whether or not I wanted to review this show. I was debating whether or not I wanted to read the book. But about halfway through this first episode, I realized I was going to be all in. The most gripping part of it is seeing young Eli McCullough as a teenager in 1849. You know, he's hunting for turkey, and he's basically just trying to help provide for his family while his father's away. And one night, their house gets surrounded by a local Indian tribe, and when they come in the door, I mean, they're vastly outnumbered. Eli decides to open fire. According to his brother, that's what escalates the situation, but we never really know because the house gets burned down, the sister and mother get raped and murdered. Eli and his brother get dragged off into the wilderness, and the brother basically is an intellectual and wanted to go to Harvard, and he can't handle this environment, whereas Eli is really trying to eat and survive and learn and do whatever he can just to stay alive a little longer. And there's this incredible scene that this is what really cinched it for me. The brother's name is Martin, I believe. Yeah, Martin. Martin stands up and starts talking about history and about how inevitably the Native Americans were going to be extinguished. And he's essentially kind of almost talking crazy and provoking these guys that are holding him captive. And this one young guy just hops up on a horse with a lance and just repeatedly rides by him over and over again, just keeps impaling him until finally Martin collapses. I mean, Martin just totally gives up and wants to die. But when I saw that scene, I was like, holy shit. That is intense. What's going to happen next? In the present day, which is 1915, we really get introduced to the major characters, and the thrust of the conflict is that you have these two ranches nearby one another that are competing, and they have kind of a wary, watchful peace. And one's run by a very successful Mexican family, and one's run by a very, very successful white family, which is Pierce Brosnan's kind of the head of it. And they do socialize and they do interact and they invite each other to parties and they compete in business and that sort of thing. Both of them just want to run their ranches in peace. But then on the Mexican ranch, you have a very, very young man who's a bit of a political revolutionary and wants to be part of an all-out assault on southern Texas and believes that Mexico will be able to reclaim all this land. And he ends up sabotaging an oil well during Pierce Brosnan's big party, trying to attract outside investment, which leads to him being captured and imprisoned. And so all of a sudden you have this potential race war that might blow up any second between these two rival families. But for me, what's always most interesting about Pierce Brosnan is when he gets to play a genuine dirtbag. While he does have his admirable qualities and he's really trying to just carve out a life or an empire for him and his family, he's also unafraid to turn a blind eye when local guys decide to take the law into their own hands and lynch some of the competition and that sort of thing. So he's a very morally compromised individual. However, people definitely look up to him in the community, in particular his sons. His son Pete, played by Henry Garrett, is the least inclined to go along with his father, or at least he most openly resists this and basically doesn't understand why there has to always be constant threat of bloodshed. Why can't everybody just work in peace and harmony with one another? Pierce Brosnan's in pure Texas Southern boy mode, and he's clearly enjoying just kind of chewing the scenery. And you know, Southerners there's a certain breed of Southerners that likes to be very colorful and kind of play with their language and their accents, and they enjoy showing off a bit. He definitely is embracing that, one of those people that thinks that the most bounteous, glorious place that ever was created on this planet is South Texas. So in episode 2, The Plum Tree, I got even more invested in the flashback story from 1849 because Eli is really struggling to survive in this Native American camp. I mean, he wakes up and sees this beautiful girl with plants. It's almost like she's offering him flowers, but it turns out she's not offering him flowers because she likes him. She's placing them at his feet to set the ground on fire and to burn him alive because he's hanging above his open fire pit, and he's thrashing about and kicking, and he's in agonizing pain. They finally let him down, and they put him to work with the women scraping hides, and he's screwing it up, and they're beating him with sticks every opportunity and talking shit and spitting in his face. I mean, they're just really letting him have it. And one night he finally decides that he can't take any more of this, decides to escape. And there's one guy who's super cool, a guy who speaks a little English and a little Spanish, a little of every language. He tells him a story about learning to survive with pain and with anguish. And the following day, Eli stands up to this girl and says, "Look, if you hit me again, I'm going to kill you." They end up having this fight. The men basically are impressed by the fact that he's no longer allowing himself to be beaten by the women, so they allow him to come sit in their circle, and they pass the peace pipe and that sort of thing. And I love the girl gets pissed. She looks at all these guys and like, which one of you told him to stand up to me? And so these dynamics are really, really fascinating to watch as you see Eli becoming part of the men of the tribe. But even more interesting, that night, this same girl who used to beat him with a stick sneaks into his tent, wakes him up, kind of holds him down, and starts fucking him. And he's definitely not, the aggressor in the situation. He's just kind of lying back and just going along for the ride. But it's fascinating seeing, I guess, all these skills that he's acquiring, living with these people, 500 miles from the closest white person. So back in the present day, in 1915, we see this ongoing conflict between Eli, Pierce Brosnan, and his son Pete, who have different ideas about how to get the information out of the saboteur who blew up one of the oil rigs. While Pete is inclined to talk to him and try to coax the information out of him, Eli is more inclined to beat him and torture him, chop off his ear, etc. And there's been this document that's been floating around lately that's been riling up a lot of people who have more kind of revolutionary political inclinations. And Pete essentially takes a huge risk and decides to sneak this guy out before his family can do any more harm to him. But as he's trying to set him free across the Rio Grande to go into Mexico, a fight breaks out, and Pete ends up having to kill him. So it ends on a very, very sad note. But what's more important is that the saboteur is married to the daughter of Pedro Garcia, the rival rancher in the area, who's got, like I said, a watchful peace between him and Pierce Brosnan. So the question remains just how bad the fallout will be from this guy being killed, even though Pete was technically trying to help him and free him, because Pete's going to be in trouble with his father, and then Pedro is going to be pissed at Pierce Brosnan. And anyway, it's all the ingredients are there for a big, epic, violent showdown where no one will clearly win or lose. So I'm in. I think the show's really cool. I think it's really well written. It's technically a Western, but it doesn't look and feel like a traditional Western. It feels more just like a historical film in a lot of ways. Whether you like films about history or Westerns, I have a feeling you'll be into this. And if you're not into Westerns or history, then leave the sun alone. So I'm really looking forward to digging into that book, and hope you enjoyed this recap and review. If you enjoyed this, please give my channel a subscribe. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to reviewing The Leftovers Season 3 and Fargo Season 3, both of which start in a little over a week. And I'll be sticking around with the Sun as well and reviewing this, because there's 8 more episodes to go, and I'm thoroughly enjoying it, so why not ride this one out? So anyway, give me a shout on Twitter at Colbrax if you want to talk more, and hope everybody has an awesome week. Talk to you soon.